Marcus Hale had been wearing those boots for 11 years. The left sole was separating at the toe. He'd re-glued it twice, with construction adhesive, and it held, mostly, though it made a faint sound on polished floors that he'd learned to manage by keeping to the outer edge of his step. He noticed this every time he entered buildings like this one. High ceilings, marble lobby, the particular silence that expensive square footage purchases. He noticed it, and he did not care, because he was here to file one document and get back to Lily before 6. He did not know that Diana Ashworth was in this building. He did not know she was the woman whose signature appeared on the development lease for floors 8 through 12, the floors directly above the 3 that belonged to his firm. He did not know that she had passed through this lobby 11 minutes ago, or that she was in the elevator that was about to reach the ground floor at exactly the moment his boots crossed the threshold. He did not know any of that. She did not know that the man in worn work boots crossing the marble toward the reception desk owned the $80 million construction firm occupying the floors beneath. She did not know his name. She looked at the boots first, then the calloused hands, then the folder tucked under one arm. Contractor, mid-range, service visit, and she made a calculation that took less than 1 second, the way her father had trained her to read rooms before she was old enough to vote. She was wrong about nearly everything. She held the elevator door because she had been taught that the person with the power holds the door. He nodded once, did not smile, and looked at the floor indicator as the doors closed. Somewhere above them, in the mechanical room on the 4th floor, a water supply riser was failing. The water hadn't reached the ceiling tiles yet. It was, in that moment, just a sound, small, rhythmic, and wrong tapping against the inside of a wall that neither of them could see. Marcus's morning had started at 4:51 a.m., which was when Lily tried to be quiet and wasn't. She was 7 now and had decided recently that being loud was a habit that belonged to other people. A position she held with the conviction of a child who had also decided that Professor, her stuffed rabbit, one-eyed, missing the left ear entirely after an incident she refused to discuss, needed to accompany her everywhere. Inside her backpack, because Professor was afraid of being left alone, and Lily understood this because she had been afraid of it once too, when she was 4, and someone had sat with her until she wasn't, and she remembered. Marcus had been the one to sit with her. He did not reference this. He made eggs. By 5:15 the workshop was running, 3 crews in the field, 1 in the fabrication yard, and the Callaway Street renovation in its final phase, with county inspection scheduled for Tuesday. On his workbench sat a clipboard with 3 client names that would mean nothing to most people, and everything to anyone who had spent time in high-end architectural circles: a senator's private residence in New Hampshire, a family name from a Tokyo auction catalog, and a Newport Marina commission waiting 16 months for exactly the grade of marine decking his fabrication team could produce to specification. He did not think of these as impressive. He thought of them as commitments. The number that lived behind his eyes at all times was not on the clipboard. It was $12 million, and it had 9 days. The bridge loan securing Hale Construction's headquarters building came due on the 15th. The refinancing had been in progress for 60 days, conditions met, documents filed, a process that should have been a formality. 3 weeks ago, someone had recorded a competing lien against the building using forged authorization signatures, and the lender had frozen the refinancing pending investigation. 9 days, $12 million. If the lien challenge he'd filed through his attorney wasn't resolved before the 15th, the building went to the bank and 31 people would arrive on a Monday morning to a company that existed only on paper. He did not tell Lily this. She asked him at breakfast why he was quiet. He said he was thinking about the Newport Marina project. She looked at him the way she always looked at him: direct, unhurried, with the brown eyes that were her mother's, and he felt as he always felt, which was seen, and then she picked up Professor and held the rabbit toward him across the table. She did this when she thought someone needed company. He took the rabbit, set it between them, and finished his coffee. She called this lending him someone. She was 7. He dropped her at school at 8 and drove downtown with the document on the passenger seat, an affidavit his attorney had prepared, which needed to reach the county recorder's office before end of business. The county recorder was on the 4th floor of the Ashworth Tower. Resting in the brackets behind his rear seat was a Starrett Master Precision Level, 40 years old, its cast iron frame worn smooth at the grip. It had belonged to the structural engineer who taught him load path analysis in the field before any university had a chance to complicate what that man knew in his hands. Marcus had used it on every significant project he'd touched for 2 decades. It was a tool. He parked on the street. He walked in through the front entrance. His left boot made its sound on the... Diana Ashworth's morning had started at 7 with the conclusion of a 9-week proxy campaign. By 9:20, she had acquired the complete project pipeline of Norcross Meridian Partners' 4 commercial development sites, combined value of $220 million, through a board vote she had spent 5 weeks engineering. The Norcross chair had sat at the far end of the table while she explained what had happened, and his face did the thing she had seen before, the particular collapse of a man who believed he was safe and was learning otherwise in real time. She was not unkind about it. She was simply accurate. What Diana Ashworth's money could not touch was her brother. Thomas had died on a construction site 6 years ago, a scaffold failure. Investigation closed by the company's legal team before she had summoned the will to look at it. She had been 29. She had told herself she wasn't ready. Then, years had passed, and the not being ready had calcified into something she could no longer distinguish from a deliberate... She thought about him in specific moments, empty rooms at dawn, the seconds after a large conclusion, and lobbies where marble floors did the particular thing marble does with sound. She was walking through this one, thinking about Thomas, when she saw the man in worn boots and made her assessment and held the elevator door. He looked at the floor indicator. She asked which floor. He said 4. She was going to 4. The elevator rose. The pipe failed at 11:44 a.m. and sent water through the 4th floor ceiling tiles in a manner that was immediately and completely impassable. The clerk at the county recorder's window said she was very sorry. The office was closed. All filings could be handled Thursday. Marcus did not have until Thursday. He explained this briefly and without frustration, the way he explained structural load constraints to architects who had not accounted for physics in their vision boards. The clerk said she was very sorry. The office was closed. Diana was 4 feet away, waiting for a permit confirmation from the same office, receiving the same information. She watched the man in the boots hear it and make no outward movement at all, no argument, no visible adjustment, just a stillness. And then he turned and walked back toward the elevator. She caught up without quite deciding to. "You need the county recorder." "I know where I need to be," he said. "The Circuit Court Annex on 5th has a secondary filing window for time-sensitive instruments." She said this like a practical observation. If the document requires a witness, it doesn't need a witness. It needs to be stamped and logged before the 15th. He said this quietly, more to himself than to her, the way a person speaks when they are moving through options they've already run through once and are now running through again. She said, "Then Thursday is your problem." "Thursday is Thursday's problem," he said. "The 15th is mine." He started walking. She walked beside him. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. He looked at the floor indicator. She looked at the burn scar below his cuff, long and pale along the forearm. Healed flat, old. She looked away. She said, without deciding to, "What's on the 15th?" He didn't answer. "Nothing that concerns you," he said. "I own this building." He looked at her then, not with the focused attention of a person recalculating the way she imagined very good engineers looked at a structure they had initially read incorrectly. He looked at her, and then looked back at the floor indicator. The elevator reached the lobby. They stepped out. She said, before she'd determined whether to, "The pipe on 4. Was that the supply line?" The question had escaped before she finished deciding to ask it. She heard it land and felt slightly foolish. He looked at her for 1 second. "Supply. The corrosion pattern on these risers is original to the building. This one has been showing mineral deposit accumulation at the connector for approximately 3 years. He paused. "The risers above floors 7 through 11 are on the same installation schedule. If you haven't replaced them, you have 6 months before one goes in a worse location." He said this without emphasis, as a report on the existing problem, not the conversation that had just occurred. He held the front door. She walked through it. She turned back to say something, and he was already moving toward the street, and she found herself watching him cross the sidewalk toward a gray truck, 2000 rust above the right wheel well, without quite understanding what she was doing. The question she hadn't meant to ask was still in the lobby behind her. She ran into him again 40 minutes later, because she was cutting through the parking structure on Meridian, and she heard a child. Not distress, something else. The sound of a child explaining something important to an audience that may or may not be listening. She followed it to the gray truck. A 7-year-old was sitting on the front bumper, holding a one-eyed rabbit, addressing it in a low, instructional tone. Through the truck's rear window, she could see a precision level resting in custom steel brackets, cast iron, clearly old, the kind of instrument that cost what a service contractor's weekly margin might not cover. She stopped for a half-second looking at it before she noticed the child. Marcus was crouched beside the rear wheel well with a phone to his ear, speaking at a volume she couldn't make out. The child looked up. She appraised Diana with the directness of someone who has not yet learned to disguise appraisal. "He gets smaller when he's worried," the child said without preamble, as though she had been expecting this conversation. "Not quieter, smaller. He's been smaller all week, and he won't say why, but Professor knows." Diana looked at the rabbit. "Does he? Professor's good at knowing things. He's missing an eye, and Dad says that's why he sees more carefully with the one he has left." She held Professor out toward Diana. "I'm Lily. This is Professor. He's afraid of being alone." Diana reached out and touched Professor's remaining ear. She was not certain what else to do. "Hello," she said. Lily treated this as exactly correct. She smiled. "He likes you." Then she looked at her father. "Dad, the lady from the building." Marcus stood. He looked at Lily, then at Diana, then at Lily again in the particular way parents do when trying to establish what has been shared. "Lily, I told her you were smaller," Lily said, with complete factual confidence. She looked at Diana. "He made the bridge. He doesn't talk about it, but I asked his friend Jimmy, and Jimmy said Dad made it so it won't fall down for 100 years. She held Professor against her chest. "I think that's why he doesn't talk about it. Some things are just true and you don't have to say them." Marcus said, "I apologize." "Don't," Diana said. She looked at him. Is the filing situation being handled? She had spent the last 40 minutes identifying the circuit court annex procedures and calling ahead to confirm the secondary window accepted affidavits of this type. She did not mention this. "The annex on 5th will take time-sensitive instruments until 4:30. I called to confirm. He looked at her, not warmly, with the same careful attention he had given everything else about her. I look things up. It's how I work. You looked it up for me, he said. A fact, not accusatory. She looked at Lily, who was looking at Professor with the concentrated attention of someone who already knows what a grown-up is feeling and is giving them room to catch up. Something in the child's face, the quality of the brown eyes, the stillness stopped Diana mid-breath. Something that felt like a room she had been in before, long ago. I have a meeting, she said. Thank you, Marcus said. She walked away. 3 steps out, she realized she had said nothing in return, and then realized she had not needed to, and then realized she did not understand why that was, and she walked fast. Preston Cahill arrived at the parking structure at 2:15 in a suit cut precisely for him. Before he spoke, he straightened his cuffs right first, then left twice, exactly, a sequence as practiced as a signature. Then he looked at the truck and said, "You're still here." He was addressing Marcus. He did not acknowledge Lily, who had fallen asleep in the cab with Professor tucked against her side. I'm parked, Marcus said. This is a permit structure. Cahill walked slowly, with the ease of a man who had spent years using property to calibrate other people's worth. He reached the tailgate and picked up the pen that was resting there, Marcus's pen, sitting where Marcus had left it, and held it, for no reason, the way some people touch things to assert that they can. The lien appeal, the county recorder's office had an incident today. I'm aware. These timeline complications can compound. Cahill tapped the pen against his palm, a slow, metronomic rhythm. The affidavit gets returned on a technicality. The recorder's clock doesn't reset. You're looking at the 16th, 17th. Building goes on the 15th. These things happen to people who don't have the right resources, but they do, Marcus said. He said it quietly, at the exact same volume as everything else he said. He walked to Cahill and stopped 2 feet away, and when he spoke it was low enough that only Cahill could hear it. The Cayman account registered under your mother's maiden name received 4 wire transfers between January and March. The authorization codes on each transfer match your credentials from the Meridian subcontract codes that only the project manager of record would have held. The LLC that received the funds, Cahill Holdings Trust, Delaware, registered January 3rd, was incorporated 11 days before the first transfer landed. Cahill was very still. The FBI Financial Crimes Division maintains a standing interest in patterns like this, Marcus said, particularly when the forged signatures belong to a licensed structural engineer. He held out his hand. In it was the pen. Cahill looked at the pen. He looked at Marcus. He reached for his right cuff. His hand stopped before it got there. He did not straighten anything. He stood in the concrete cold for a moment that had no temperature and no sound. And then he turned and walked to the elevator without looking back. His footsteps were the only sound in the structure. Diana had been standing near the stairwell entrance. She had come back to return a document. She told herself this later. And it was true, and it was also not the whole truth. She watched the elevator doors close behind Preston Cahill, and she stood in the parking structure, and she said nothing. Because she had no words for what she had just witnessed, which was not merely a man being removed from a situation. It was the careful conclusion of something that had been built over a long time, by a person who had made it look like patience. She turned and looked at Mark. He was checking on Lily through the passenger window, his hand resting against the door's cold metal. His face was doing nothing dramatic. She wanted to speak. She had nothing. She said, finally, I'm sorry. 2 words. He looked at her. He looked back at Lily. He said, You didn't do it. I know, she said. I'm sorry anyway. He didn't answer. She did not press. She walked out of the parking structure into the November afternoon, and she drove to her office, and she sat at her desk, and she typed his name into the state engineering license database. Because she had to know. The license was assigned to Marcus Hale, P.E., structural engineer, active since 1999. Under associated entities, Hale Construction Group, LLC, under significant projects, the list ran long until she reached the line she had not anticipated. Lead structural engineer, Meridian Bridge, State Infrastructure Contract 1998 Infra 042. Project value $340 million. She read it 3 times. Then, founder and majority shareholder Hale Construction Group. Current assessed valuation, $80 million. She sat with this. Then she opened the Meridian subcontract files her father's company had archived, because they were on her network, because she had avoided them for 6 years, and because she was done avoiding. The materials substitution authorization for the 3rd scaffold, tier the bracket, the one that killed Thomas, did not carry Marcus Hale's signature. It carried the signature of her father's operations director, a man who had been on Preston Cahill's subcontractor payroll from the project's start. She went to find Marcus. She knew, without knowing how, to try the bridge. She found him at the midpoint of the pedestrian walkway in the early dark, standing at the railing, looking at the water below. He did not turn when he heard her steps. He said, "I wondered how long." She stood beside him. The water moved 30 feet below, black and slow. "The permit records," she said. He nodded. "You built this bridge. My crew built it. I engineered it." He looked at the water. The design phase took 4 years. Construction took 3. Longest span of its type in the state at the time. A pause. "I know every tolerance in this structure. Every connection sequence. Every load path. And the firm. I started it 8 years after the bridge. I don't go into the field much. My project managers run the jobs. I sign off on the engineering." $80 million, she said. He said nothing. She said, "The materials substitution on the scaffold tier. The bracket that failed." He looked at her then. "It wasn't your sign-off," she said. "It was not a question." She had read it. "My father's operations director changed the specification after your engineering package was filed. He was on Cahill's payroll." The water moved below them. "I found the substitution records 4 months after the accident," Marcus said. He said it in the same flat, declarative register he used for everything else, the report of a fact, delivered without theater. Lily was 2 months old. "My wife had died in surgery 3 weeks before the bridge opened, which is why I was alone when I found what I found, and alone when I decided what to decide." He looked at the water. "I chose what kept the lights on. I have spent 6 years building the evidence that would make the other choice possible." That's what the affidavit is. That's what Cahill's file is. Diana's hands were on the iron railing. Cold, both of them. He did not reach for her. He stood beside her above the black water and let her be where she was, and what she felt was not guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. It was the particular weight of understanding that arrives when you finally read the thing you have been not reading for years, and the thing is worse than you and also somehow more survivable than you thought, because someone else has been carrying it all this time and has not been destroyed by it. She did not cry. Her hands stayed on the railing. He said, "Your brother wasn't nobody's fault except the people who changed the spec and the people who buried it afterward." She said, "I know. You didn't know 6 years ago." "No. Then you don't owe me the apology," "You owe it to Thomas." She looked at the water for a long time. Cahill moved on Thursday. He moved on the only piece still available to him. He sent a process server to Lily's school with a court petition naming Marcus Hale as a participant in the fraudulent lien claim, reframing the forged signatures as originating from the engineer of record, rather than the man who had forged them. If the petition succeeded in triggering a PE license suspension, the affidavit became invalid. If the affidavit was invalid, the lien stood, and the building went on the 15th. Marcus was at the school in 8 minutes. Diana had been on the phone with the FBI Financial Crimes Division since 8 that morning. Not because she was required to. Because she had read everything, all the way through, and had provided the complete wire transfer records from her company's archived subcontractor files records that placed Cahill inside. The Meridian fraud with a specificity that left no interpretive room, and 2 agents were already in the school's administrative building when she arrived at 11. The petition was in Cahill's name. The authorization codes matched the Cayman transfer. The agents had what they needed before the process server finished explaining why he was there. Cahill was in the parking lot when the second vehicle arrived. He was in his car, engine running, and he saw the federal plates and sat very still. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He looked at the building. He reached for his phone and did not use it, because there was no call and he understood this in the previous 30 seconds, and understanding it did not change it. The agents knocked on the car window. He straightened his right cuff, then his left. Then he opened the door and stepped out. Marcus stood on the school's front steps with Lily beside him, Professor under her arm. Diana stood a half step back. They watched Preston Cahill walk through the parking lot between 2 federal agents in the flat gray light of a November morning, his steps measured and controlled, and then he stopped walking at the rear of the vehicle, and he turned and looked at Marcus, and he said, "You have no idea what you've started." Marcus looked at him. He said, "Leave." One word. Quietly, the way he said everything. That the agents guided Cahill into the vehicle. The door closed. The car moved through the parking lot toward the street and did not stop at the light and was gone. Marcus's attorney called at 2:50. The lien had been withdrawn. The building was clear. The refinancing would proceed on the original terms. Marcus stood in the fabrication yard and listened and said thank you, and then stood with the phone in his hand, because $12 million and 9 days had been a weight he'd carried so long he'd stopped noticing it, and its absence felt less like relief, and more like the return of something ordinary, the silence, after a sound you'd learned to live inside. Diana was standing at the fence line. He hadn't heard her. She looked at him, and then looked at the fabrication yard, the 3 new bays, the materials racked in order, the nameplate on the office door. She looked at the boots. She looked at his face, and what she saw there was a man who had been waiting a long time for something to stop. And it had stopped, and he was standing in his yard on a Thursday afternoon. And that was all he had actually wanted. She said, "I see it now." He looked at her. "From the first second," she said, "in the lobby. I looked at you and I decided in under a second, and I was wrong about every single thing." He said, "Most people are." "I'm not," she said. "Or I wasn't." She looked at the nameplate. "I am now, apparently." He almost smiled. The corners of his eyes did something. She looked away before she was certain. 1 year later. Lily turned 8 in November and planned her birthday party with the precision she brought to all significant events. 4 guests, carefully selected. Marcus, Diana's assistant, whom Lily had decided was important because he answered her questions directly and without condescension, which she respected. And Professor, who was technically not a guest, but had seniority and had earned his place at the table. There was cake. Lily wore red. She spent part of the afternoon explaining to Professor that 8 was not categorically different from 7, except in the matter of authority. which Lily felt she had always had, so perhaps the distinction was administrative. Marcus had moved the fabrication yard to a facility 6 blocks east. The 3 new bays were running at capacity. On the office wall where the foreclosure notice had been, there was now a framed copy of the State Infrastructure Commission's 30-year integrity certification for the Meridian Bridge. Below it, a crayon drawing, Lily's handwriting in blue marker. Dad's Bridge. Diana's office had she had installed them herself on a Sunday morning, while Marcus sat at her kitchen table with Lily, engaged in a project involving pipe cleaners and a structural rationale that Lily explained at length and Marcus followed with complete seriousness. The curtains were linen, and they let the light in differently than glass alone. She noticed this every morning when she came. She had not found a way to describe what she felt about it that wasn't embarrassing, so she had not tried. It was enough to notice it. She and Marcus were in the kitchen when she stepped back to look at the curtains she had hung. He was standing near the counter, not quite beside her. His hand rested on the counter between them. Neither of them moved it. Lily looked up from the pipe cleaner structure across the table. She looked at them the way she looked at things she had already figured out but was prepared to wait on. She looked at Professor. She said, with the absolute authority of a person who has considered this carefully and arrived at the correct conclusion, "I'm going to call them the engineers." She meant both of them. She returned to her structure. Some truths arrive in the wrong season, through the wrong door, wearing boots that make a sound no one else would notice. If you spent 6 years protecting a truth that could clear your name, but might destroy everything you built while you were waiting, would you release it? Or would you hold it one more year? Share this with someone who has ever held something heavier than they let anyone see. And subscribe, because we tell these stories every week, and every one of them is true in the way that matters. Then tell us, would you have kept carrying it, or would you have let it go before you were ready? We read every one,